Can you tell us about how does this come about? Why are schoolgirls pregnant?
Well, the school children are getting pregnant due to a number of factors. Among them, the socio-economic factors, for example, poverty, and the other one, issues to do with the law and police. So those three actually are the key drivers for teenage pregnancy in schools. And if we talk about poverty, for example, when we were in Eastern Province, particularly in Chipata, we spoke to a number of pupils, and they said for them to earn a living, to buy their pads when they are mainstreaming,
yes,
and to buy lunch during lunch, and to get to school, they need somebody to give them money, and they rely on the taxi drivers.
So there is a kind of exchange,
exactly,
of services.
Of services, you know, young people, most of these pupils, especially in the rural areas, are coming from the poor families,
okay,
who cannot provide for them. So in turn, they look for an alternative.
What do the schools do, or what do the schools refuse to do to help these girls? I understand that there could be more information, there could be family planning available in the schools. Why are these things happening, and what is the situation?
Well, the school actually are not allowing to provide services in the schools.
So no condoms?
No condoms, no family planning, because that's the stance of the Minister of Education.
The Minister of Education,
yes. So what they are saying is we can give information to the pupils about safe sex, about abstinence, and so forth. But in terms of accessing services, that is not possible within the school premises.
And that puts a barrier on your activity then?
Definitely, that puts a huge barrier to our activities, and then also not only to activities, but also puts young people who are sexually active at high risk of falling pregnant.
So what kind of solutions can you propose, or have you found so far any solution that
for us, our proposal is to the government, through the Minister of Education, to look into the unwritten policy of no access to family services within the school premises. And then the other alternative, if government's arm will still be unchanged, we suggest that the health facilities partner with the schools to offer occasional services, say, or maybe every Wednesday, the health facility will go there and provide the services.
There is no access of condoms in schools. What happens in the streets, where also young people live in the streets?
Yeah, for young people in the streets, it's even worse, because they might not even know where to access the condoms. So in the end, whatever condom they end up sharing
condoms.
The condoms, and which is not healthy again, and puts them even more at risk. In the rural areas, it's the same situation, you know, where people, you know, share the condoms because they don't have access.
Do they share the condoms because the condoms are too expensive?
Not really the condom being expensive, but it's the issue of availability of condom at these health facilities where they are supposed to be.
So they are kilometers away from the health center that could provide their condoms.
Exactly.
And they end up sharing, reusing the condom. What does the new draft constitution say about reproductive health rights?
Well, the current draft constitution actually is not progressive when we talk about sexual and reproductive health rights, especially in relation to safe abortion, because there is a clause that is sitting in there that says that life begins at conception. So that in itself has a lot of implications when you talk about safe abortion and other services regarding family planning.
So that means, for example, that if you would administer the next day pill to a child,
that would be a crime.
That would be a crime.
Yeah, and you can
so that would make the situation worse than today.
Yes, today the situation is better. But in the
and can you also explain to our viewers the difference between the civil law and
the customary law?
Yeah, and what conflicts you have in this field?
Yeah, well, the current contradiction between the two laws are too many. We'll talk about the issue of marriage, also talk about the issue of sex consent, where the customary law would marry anyone so long as of age. The statement stating that person is deemed mature.
So according to that law, a child that has passed the adolescence and can be married and can have intercourse.
Yes.
And that's legal. As long as the parents consent.
That's it.
And then
the two parents.
The two parents.
Yes.
And what does the civil law say then?
The civil law
for that age.
It's you can consent sex at 16.
16.
Yes, and then you can get married at 21 or 18.
Are these perpetrators ever brought in front of the justice?
Yeah, I think now the public is aware about the issue of defilement, and they are reporting the issues to the police.
Right.
Yeah.
And something is sometimes
done.
Yes,
and we have secured a number of prosecution, I think, in the cases of defilement, and which is good because the country cannot no longer allow young people being defiled by big people. It's a big problem in our country, and the government and the state institutions, the police and the judiciary, I think they are doing a good job so far.
So the problem you're facing is what you call the intergenerational sex.
Yes. That's
something that is very, very specific.
Yes.
I saw you showed me numbers that about 12,500 pupils have this declared pregnancy.
Yes.
What percentage is that from the school population? Because the numbers I saw were not put in relation to the total school population.
Yeah, either I wouldn't convert them in percentage, but if you can see the absolute number, that would roughly give us about 50%.
How do the parents react when this happens? How do they deal with this when they have their daughter coming home?
Pregnant. Actually, this is what we, as the area on mentioned in our meeting, this is what we are calling double tragedy. Because you see, the parents are not expecting children to fall pregnant while they are in school. They expect them to graduate.
Yes.
And unfortunately, they receive a pregnancy, and that pregnancy has no responsible guy to look after it. So it means the parents will have to care. An
additional burden.
Yes, an additional burden for that child, and the grave loss of the investment that have invested in that child.
The lost future.
Exactly, future for their daughter. Yeah.
The daughter.
Yeah. So that's really. It's very stressful to the parents, and also the parents actually are concerned that the school need to do something about this.
What is the attitude of the church? Because I understand there are many schools that are run by the church.
Yeah.
What is the church or what are the missionaries? What's their role in this issue?
Well, the missionaries also, they have their own values, so they would not promote sexual and reproductive health within their school premises. Because they have Christian values that run counter to the values of sexual and reproductive health rights. Yeah.
I would like to come back to the Constitution.
Yes.
Who funds the new draft Constitution?
And I think it was a cost sharing. Of course, the government of Zambia had put in something. They appointed a technical working team that was responsible for consultation as well as drafting the constitution that was paid from the public. coffers, and then I think the process of consultation also, we had some cooperating partners who came on board to fund the process of consultation together with the government.
And do you think that this funding, the way it is funded, is affecting women's rights? The women's rights, to a certain extent.
I wouldn't say it does, but I think the consultation process might have affected, because not all women, especially the marginalized, would have their voice heard in these consultation processes.
Why are politicians reluctant to
change
to put this change
in the law? That's a good question. I mean, it's all about politics. They are playing politics, so they go for numbers.
So populism.
Yes, it's populism. So they would not listen to minorities, because the police need to be informed by the majority. So they will go with the majority.
So that's why we put it in the medium term.
Yes, in the medium term.
Abbas, you shared with us during these last few days your goal, your dream of setting up your own foundation, a research foundation. You will expand in Livingstone, you showed us. So I would like to understand how you came to this, and what has been your parcours, your path to reach this day. Tell us a little bit about all the steps in your life that brought you to this stage.
So in terms of what inspired
Exactly.
me, and for me to be able to get where I am now. So the institute you're talking about, its full name is Barnabas Research and Training Institute, founded by myself. My full names are Barnabas Mwasa. I was born in 1977 on the 25th of December, on a Christmas
Day.
Very beautiful day, yeah. Now, later in life, when I grew up and I reflected on my childhood, I saw a pattern of my life. And that pattern indicated and directed to one thing, that probably I could have been born a development worker, a person that looks at social justice and ensure that we begin to challenge the ideas of development. And this also defined as a childhood. What I was sharing you the other day was that when I was born, during the period of 1977, Zambia just had gotten independence in 1964. So if you imagine, that was about 14, 15 years later. So it was relatively a new country with a lot of hope and prosperity and aspirations. So in that sense, the institutions that were left were very stable at that time by the colonial masters. So among the things that were left was that in the hospital I was born, Changa South Hospital, was a very clean hospital. If you like, it had all the equipment, doctors, nurses, it had all the necessary equipment. The other day I was actually joking with a friend of mine, saying, if you went to that hospital then, that time, immediately by just entering the hospital, you get healed. Today you go to that hospital, you feel that you're going to die. So that's what has transformed our institution. So having born then and grown up in that society, when I reflected.
If I wanted to ask you more specifically about those years with your family, and I understand you moved in different places in the country, and you had to endure some specific experience. Can you talk to us about how that was shaping the future?
Yeah, so if you look at it, during that period, my father was working for the mines, and he worked for the mines for a long time. Now, we were coming to a period when Zambia was actually coming into a debt trap, if you will, where we had borrowed quite a lot of money from international organizations like the World Bank and the IMF. And at the end of 1980, we were purely broke as a country. And then we had to go back and request and start lending, borrowing money from the World Bank. And the structure adjustment program started then at that time. So my father was among those people that lost his job in 1986. So that purely meant that he lost his livelihood. I lost my access to education. I went to a very, very good school. We were just about 15 blacks at that school then. The whole entire population were white population. So I lost access to a quality education, and I did mention to you that one, I had access to proper health care. I lost that access to healthcare.
So what were the solutions then for your father and your family?
Yeah, so what were
had
the
to be
solutions?
done?
Yeah, so one of the solutions that my dad had was first of all to try to move away from that area where we were staying to look for employment. And the only employment he found was a local company then, it's called Zambia Forest and Forestry Industries. So he looked at forestry, and then because they were looking at plantation and forestry in Zambia, he was sent into a rural area. So we went to a rural area, and in that rural area, what I discovered was that we moved from a flat, a very beautiful flat where we had my own room, and when we went there, what happened was that we went into a tin house, if you will. And the tin house is a very small house, and it's purely made of tin. And there was no bedroom, no toilet, no bathroom, no water, and that's where we started living.
So a radical change of
Radical
lifestyle.
change of lifestyle, if you understand that. And then thereafter, the school that I went to also, I went to a government school, but it was run by Catholics then. And then the teachers that were there were untrained teachers who were running the school. So they couldn't really speak English. The only person that could speak English is myself, because I came from a school where I was speaking English. And so I had to start teaching and helping the fellow pupils at that time. So that also made me to begin to reflect, then later in life as an adult, to reflect the opportunities that are lost by many kids, and how policies affect those people who don't have power to be able to influence policies. And this also began to change my life in terms of how I look at the world and how I needed to transform it, because I realized that many kids in rural areas of part of our country don't have access to education, proper education, quality education. They don't have access to health services, and most of kids actually die because they have to walk long distances to the next health center. So that is why, that's my background. And living in that area when my father lost the job that he got was not a better job, as well, that he was not protected by the labor laws. So those things are influenced and started shaping myself. Unfortunately, it did not work for long in that environment. We were only there for about 9 months, and then we had to move into the city. Now, when we came into the city, I almost about completed my education, grade 12.
The secondary,
Yes, and when I completed my secondary school, I started working. I started working with a private company, and they were selling toothpaste.
So you didn't go and study immediately after your school?
Well, I did a course in marketing immediately after school. So I did the marketing course, and the minute I finished that course, I started working as a marketer.
Did you have ambition to study more, or there were no funds to study, or what is the reason why you were satisfied with a short marketing course and an immediate entry in the professional world?
Yeah, what happened is that during my lifetime, when my father lost the job and then he got this new job, and as I already pointed out to this, that his incomes were not very high. So I was sent to go and stay with the family, my aunt and my uncle. And during that period, the environment in which I lived could not provide me an opportunity to study and work hard and be able to exploit my skills, as you will. And that affected my final results at grade 12, the school secondary results.
Okay, which were not as good as you could
as good as. And then those could not even allow me to go into any university.
Ah, really?
Only
the
allowed
national
me to
university?
Go, yes, only allowed me to go into a college.
Right.
So it is that struggle. And then my father also did not even have money to be able to send me into a university, even if I was going to have
access.
Access. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's those combination of those things
that
changed in terms of how I looked at things. And as a result, I said, okay, let me do a course that probably would quickly empower me as a young man
to earn money,
to earn money and to do something. And that's how I went into marketing.
Okay.
And that course was very good. And immediately I graduated, I started working for this company I talked about.
Selling toothpaste?
Yes.
Where?
In Dollar. So we were marketing and trying to promoting the toothpaste, and also doing a lot of research work in terms of how people, what to do with consumer behavior, understanding the consumers, and be able to understand what they wanted and the demand within the market. So one time I walked out and I was going to do a research in low-income households. And when I was going to one of these houses, immediately when I went these are very low-income households, very poor if you characterize by any definition of poverty. if you win. And when I was there, so I knocked on the door, and then there was no one else coming. And I pushed the gate of the house, so I entered into their yard. And immediately I entered, I saw a kid sitting on top of the sewer system. So there's that cover, so I saw that the kid was sitting there. And that sewer system was peeling off. The water was just getting, water was coming out, and the kid was actually picking that and eating. And that angered me a lot. That, look, I was selling a product for a foreign company to a family that is very poor, and then they couldn't even afford to protect that kid. And this kid looked very malnourished. And immediately I saw the mother coming out of the house. The mother also looked very unhealthy. And I realized that was not the case. People should not live like that.
Right.
So it's all these patterns from my childhood that began to influence my social revolution. In terms of
Your thinking.
my
So,
thinking about how do then I effectively change
so what
that.
did you do then after realizing this?
So yeah, if you look at that story in itself, is what became my transformative story, because from there immediately I went back to the office and resigned.
You quit.
I
Yeah?
quit job, and I went and joined the local NGO, and I started working with them. We started the local NGO together, and the first project we ever implemented was looking at child health and malnutrition, reflecting on this case.
And reflecting exactly on
Yes,
what you had
yes,
seen.
and we started.
And that was in Dala.
That was in dollar, yes. And so we worked on this project for a long time, and we began to. This is a project that we founded, a local NGO we founded, and worked it and supported it for a long time, and it eventually grew. So during these processes, I realized that my skills were not matched, because then I had a certificate in marketing, and marketing was not my field. The field that I'd gone into was purely development work. So I started seeking for further education. So I had to apply for a course, a correspondence course, online course, distance learning course with the university based in the UK. They are providing a course in management, financial principles, and economics. And that I did that full course up to diploma level. So upskilling my skills from a certificate to marketing to a diploma level. And then
In a couple of years, I guess.
yeah, that took about 2 years, the
Yeah.
full course, yeah. And then thereafter, that's when I now started practicing in this NGO. And it meant that we started now getting more funding, because we had improved our human resource capacity. And personally, I improved my skills. And I became finance and admin manager and moved a lot.
But you worked in finance, right?
Yes, I did work. in
At
finance.
UNDP or for the UNDP?
No,
Or
I
at what
worked-
stage did you work
No,
for
I
this
worked-
organization?
No, I worked in finance with the same local NGO called Osana.
Right.
Yeah, so I worked there for some time. And in the process, what happened was that I started now getting interested in development much more, and realized that I needed to focus in development and influence these development processes. During that process, then I got scholarship from the Irish Aid to go and study in Ireland. And I went to study the Bachelor of Arts in Development Studies, which I studied and graduated. And when I returned back, I continued to work with this local NGO. I worked for a few months and then moved and joined an international NGO, which is called Catholic Relief Services. And I worked there as a technical advisor on organization development. This is capacity building issues. And we started transforming small NGOs to become big and large NGOs. So that's what I was giving. Now during that process, I only worked there for 8 months, and then I was privileged to get a very prestigious scholarship to go and start the Masters in Development Practice, which is a combination of about 5 masters. So it looked at social science, health science, natural and engineering science. It also looked at management science and integrated sustainable development. So it was a very rich program.
So after having spent a few years in
Dublin.
for your first degree, you went back.
I went back again to go and do my master's degree.
Okay.
Which is, and I completed that master in development practice, and then returned back home. So during that period, I needed to select which area of research that I wanted to focus on, and my research was going to focus on youth unemployment in Sub-Saharan Africa. And because Sub-Saharan Africa economies were, at the moment were growing, and they were growing very fast, but yet they're not creating employment for young people. So I said, okay, this area that I'm going to focus on. So I returned back, and I applied for an internship with the International Labour Organization, which is a UN organization, and I was admitted to work there as an intern for 3 months. So I worked there for 3 months, and I completed. Then they gave me a job as an assistant program officer, and I started working there. all time looking at youth employment and promoting some of the initiatives for the government of Zambia to create employment. So I participated in a lot of policy formulation processes for youth. I participated on strategies on youth employment, industrialization, and all that retransformed my mind to look at the structural issues that are involved in these policies. So, and then later I left the international organization and joined Save the Children International as a policy advisor to the government of Zambia under the means of gender and child development, supporting the policy frameworks. But all this period I began to realize that my childhood had a lot to do with my life. And then that's when I said, okay, fine, the area that needs to be addressed is to look at how can we influence policy formulation processes, how can we interrogate development practice as on the ground, and also do research that can inform policy and retransform the development paradigm. Because current development is that it focuses from the north and then it goes to the south. So everything is dictated from the north.
That's exactly something I wanted to ask you. I guess that at a certain point in your career, you could have worked in the north or with international organization located in the north to influence perhaps some of the from some of these issues from the donor countries or donor institutions. Have you done this, or have you made a conscious decision not to do this?
Well, there's been most of the organizations that I've worked with, primarily the NGO that I talked about, which we founded, was funded by donors mainly. The NGO that I moved to was also an international NGO. It was funded by donors. The international organization that I moved to was a UN organization, and also funded by, and all the process I found that donors were dictating the processes of development in these poor countries, and particularly in my country. And I realized that's how my childhood was affected, because of dictate of policy. And that dictate of policy by international organizations, local NGOs influencing the processes. And that became the reason why my father lost his job in the first place. And then I had to be a victim in terms of lack of access to education, healthcare, and all those things that I've talked about. And that's why I said, no, I need to set up an institution that will be a philosophy of my life and really transform some of these ideologies and question the idea of development. So that's how the Barnabas Research and Training Institute was born. So it's from that personal experience, if you read, that no one in life should, number one, lack access to healthcare services as a result of poor policies. No one should be discriminated to have access to education because of poor policy frameworks and implementation of those policies. That's how in the Barnabas Research and Training we look at policy and we question the policies and we evaluate policies and we really transform those policies and we see how much those policies impact on the lives of poor people. But then there's also another aspect to how much do we do research to understand issues of people that they go through before we make a policy. So we need to generate evidence-based research that will inform us for us to be able to understand that these are the issues and these are the issues that we need to focus on. So it's that transformative processes. But there's also another idea of saying, how do we then make sure that people have the capacity, professional capacity, in terms of knowledge, skill sets, and also ideas of development, and begin to see, because there are a lot of emerging new issues in development, issues of poverty, social injustice, human rights issues, issues to do with climate change. All these are new phenomena that have emerged in this context. But people need to understand, if you did a course 10 years ago, these new issues will be missing them. So we need to be able to bring people back to a classroom and begin to challenge that. But the most important thing is that we need to challenge that idea. So that's how the Institute is framed. But
so going forward, how would you ideally see yourself or your institution in a few years' time? What would be the main areas in which you would like to be active, and how would you like to see this operating?
Okay, so going forward, I think the key areas that we see ourselves is that we are an institute that is going to change the development paradigm by questioning development from upside down.
But how will you change that?
Number one is
to advocate.
Number one, we host development practitioners, development thinkers, we bring them together and we challenge their ideas by training people that have new ideas, new information from the class based on our research, and then we question them and say, no, this is what ideas that you're proposing don't work. So it's bringing these institutions that have power and have control over a lot of other institutions, and we sit them together and we debate and we begin to say that they need to focus more on the areas that affect the people themselves based on the research that we've done. That's the first one. So we conduct action on operational research, yes, and then begin to champion and question that. The other area is that we also need to evaluate government policy in terms of whether that policy is working. So this is where we work with local NGOs that are implementing programs in the field, and we attach research fellows to be able to understand what's going on, whether that project is making an impact on the lives of people or whether it's not making, and whether that project has negative or positive impact. And then we generate understanding that now informs policy. We have the other area which is looking at training. These are new trainings based on new outcomes of new development challenges that we are faced with. So we design programs based on the needs and as informed by our research and our policy frameworks, and then we use those trainings to be able to train practitioners in the field based on the evidence that this is what is happening. So that we change this idea that everything is controlled from the north to the south, that the south begin to translate that ideas
and feeds back to the north.
Yes. So that's how we see ourselves to be a more strategic policy and knowledge thinking institution.
So a think tank that would be instrumental in trying to influence first the policies on the ground, the domestic ones, and then by example show to the north what other possibilities there are.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what we envision ourselves. Yes. But then what are the areas that we intend to focus on? So one of the areas that we intend to focus on is issues of poverty, social justice, climate change, access to water, ensuring that kids have access to education, but not just education where you're sitting in the classroom, technology, employment issues, because these are the issues that I think many governments, and our government in particular, is failing to address. And so how can we generate knowledge and information that they can now use for them to be able to address those issues? We'll also be looking at agriculture. As if you understand, any other country that has ever developed in this world use agriculture as their bedrock to be where they are. Britain is an example. Thailand is an example, South Korea is an example. So many other countries have used agriculture, but we have plenty of land and we are not utilizing it. So it's to turn those our natural resource into economical, viable, and income generating initiatives that will actually ensure that this country move forward. So those are the areas that we'll be focusing on. Now I have a personal a project which I'm very much attached to. It's called the Barnabas Eye Project. Just to give you some highlights, when I was in Dublin doing my master's program, and I didn't even know this until I came to know. I had difficulties in terms of writing my essays, submitting my essays on time when I was a very well-performing student. So, and I had to move into, I thought maybe I needed glasses. And I went into an optician. And immediately I asked, can you give me a pair of glasses? He said, no, we need to check your eyes. And immediately they checked. This is how she said, oh, Barnabas, you're going to lose your eyes.
You're going to lose your eyes?
Yes, your eyes damaged. You never see again. And you can imagine I was shocked. And I couldn't even breathe for a moment, and I stopped. I said, what? She says, yes. And she showed my eye on the screen, and when I saw it, and I said, no. And she says, immediately I'll give you a referral. You go to the hospital. And I went to the hospital, and when I got there, the doctor looked at my eyes and said, no, we need to put eye drops. They put eye drops, pressure was not coming down, and then they said, no, we need to do a surgery on your eye. And they did the surgery. Immediately. And then that also, I had to do a lot of operations until they saved my sight, you see. But when I asked him, what causes this thing? Number one, they said, no, you need to probably have blood pressure, or probably you have diabetes, or probably you have, it's genetic. But yes. I don't have any of those.
None of those.
So what happened was that it could be because I was not checking my eyes regularly, and my eye became under threat that I probably might not see. So I realized that I need to invest, and especially in this country where we are not investing in that area. So the Barnabas Eye project is looking at screening kids at an early age to understand their vulnerability to glaucoma. And then we begin to promote, ensure that they are protected at an early age, and understand their threats and how they can manage it. So that in old age, when they are now about to learn and become productive to the society, cannot be threatened by anything. So that's the key project which we have. But we also have many other projects that we're doing, training at the Institute, research, and those issues I've talked about, and policy influence. Now, policy influence is this where we bring academicians, policymakers, and politicians themselves. They sit around a round table, and we bring the civil society, and then bring the people themselves whose policies affect, and then they are able to debate based on our research and question them and actually interrogate and appreciate some of those best policies.
Would it be easy to guarantee your neutrality or your independence? Politicians are always prefer to have people who will support their own policies, but will never want to, or rarely want to, hear criticism. Because from what I understand, you have also the ambition of creating an institution that would be highly critical to the situation. Is this a challenge in Zambia?
Well, Zambia, first of all, is a democracy. So in a democratic institutions, and especially in a democratic country, what you have is that you are open to ideas, and it's about competition of ideas and understanding of issues. The beauty about our country is that we have a very strong civil society, very strong media, press. It's very strong and free to be able to articulate and question issues. With very strong independent institutions, and the politicians themselves are more or less accountable to some extent in terms of and understanding and being able to open up. So that environment creates an environment for us to be able to operate. But secondly also is the idea that we're not being critical. Obviously we are trying to provide solutions to the problems that we all have common interest in. So we're not telling politicians what to do, we're telling them this is the problem based on our research, and here are the solutions in terms of how you address these problems. And these problems need to be addressed in a practical way using strategical approaches. And if they don't have the human resource, we get the human resource from the institution, we retrain them to understand, to have the necessary skills and knowledge to be able to address those issues. That's a forging partnership that we will be looking forward to. So,
how do you finance the activity of an NGO like this, a research center like this in Zambia in 2015?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Now, our practical approach to financing, currently we know that most of the local NGOs, civil society and other institutions have been supported by international donors. That in itself is very vulnerable because you are vulnerable to dictates, and we are very critical of dictates ourselves, so we don't want to fall into that trap. So we have modeled it, number one. We are a private public institution. We do private work where we are paid for the work that we do. We achieve public ends, meaning that we are improving
public interest. Yeah.
Public interest. And so in that approach in itself is one, we ensure that we do the training programs. So the training programs, for all the training programs, those people come to do the trainings, they are paid for the work that they come for. I mean, they pay for the trainings that they come for. And the money we generate goes then to policy-related work. Then for research, we get grants, which we don't actually administer, we give local NGOs, so that they implement, and we attach a research fellow that is well trained from our institute. So that is an NGO that is getting a grant, and then we protect the dictates from the donor. So because we are able to monitor and ensure that there is accountability, there is transparency, there is proper utilization of resources, and obviously the program that we're implementing will have a better effect on the lives of people. So that's the way we approach our financing model. So it's not purely donor dependent, but we are not saying that we not get the donors. We get donors to support programs that we ensure that will have an effect on the lives of people. Right. And we are able to prove that, yes, this is what is working. So, and then we have also realized that donor dependence in many ways, and everyone has questioned the idea of donor aid, and other people have argued that whether it works or it doesn't work. So we are saying, okay, fine, how can we really transform that and then begin to be more sustainable in terms of these resources? because sometimes some of the resources that come from donors are also vulnerable to a number of factors.
Changes,
One,
yeah,
changes in the
fluctuations.
environment, fluctuations, and also financial crisis, and that can affect your operations. So we don't want to purely depend on that. We want to be a self-financing institution, whereas we can get research grants. And we'll also be partners with other universities, colleges, reputable institutions that have a name, and they have very good programs, and we can work together to translate and transmit some of these programs. And we're not really purely very critical of the West. We will work a lot much more with Western institutions to understand and appreciate some of the best practices that have come and which have used also in terms of their implementation programs. So generally, that's the future of the Barnabas Research Center.
Well, congratulations. I think everything is in place for a bright future,
Thank you.
and we look forward to hearing from you.
I'm very grateful that we had this talk, Bernard.
Great.
Thank you so much.